Hello, Jamie Catto. How are
Hey
you this
there.
morning?
I'm pretty good, Mornings are always a little bit tender. Takes a little bit of time to remind myself it's safe being a human, entrapped
Hmm.
in an ego you know, that
Fair enough.
feels separate from everything else. So, mornings are slow for me.
Okay, fair enough. I've developed a habit of just like I practice Ashtanga yoga, so like I have a habit of just getting up as soon as my alarm goes off and drinking like loads of tea, so I don't have that moment of thinking and existential dread that
Very sensible.
I don't know if it is. I might just be avoiding the things that I need to look at, but
Avoidance is really underrated.
all right, cool. So basically, I want to start off by just reading something um, to kind of like give you a bit of background. I know about you, but you don't know anything about me. You don't know who I am.
No, I just know you make music.
Exactly. So basically, confession, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. It might look professional, but I have no idea what I'm doing. Um, I just kind of I know that we've got like similar friends or we've got mutual friends, and I have been inspired by your work from a young age. So I just thought I'd reach out and have this conversation with you about the shadow and
Mm.
about your work, about what excites you as well, and just share some space basically. So yeah. Um, so this is about me. I'm a songwriter, producer, illustrator, creative type who wants to make things that make people think, feel, and move. I want to create things that appeal to people's head, heart, and booty. I want to help people come back to themselves like music and art in general has done for me. For that, I need to reach as many people as possible to find the ones who dig it. My intention with our conversation today is to give more richness to my song Shadow Games, introduce people to your work. Not that I think I will be the most uh, not that I am like the highest authority on introducing people to your work. You seem to be very good at that. Um, and also to help people get to know themselves better. I was brought up in Muswell Hill, so I think you're from Hampstead, right?
Yeah.
So not far from you. Um, and my first introduction to your work, apart from hearing Faithless when I was young, was watching One Giant Leap as a teenager and being really inspired by all the different voices from around the world, and it was like food for thought
Yeah.
at like a formative time in my life, basically. After secondary school, I went to art school and later got a degree in guitar. Um, and just after that, I sat my first Vipassana meditation retreat, which completely altered my life's direction.
I bet. Nasty.
um, I formed a songwriting collective, selling out shows in London and living on banana farms in Tenerife, reading lots of spiritual books, um, and swimming in the sea, eating a lot of bananas. Since then, I've established a yoga practice, like I was saying earlier, been through some personal grief, and explored the practice of authentic relating, which brings me to your book, Insanely Gifted. Part of this authentic relating training was exploring the concept of the shadow. So I just read around. So I read your book.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and during that time, I started writing this song Shadow Games, which at the moment I'm in the promotional marketing part of it. I'm spending as much energy and creativity on the getting it to people as I would to actually making it, which is kind of new for me. And so, yeah, I would like to start by saying thank you for the inspiration at a young age. And thank you for your work in exploring and communicating the range of human experience and the invitation to people to be fully themselves.
Yeah, that's where it's at.
So, yeah, but I would like to start off with a very serious question.
Yeah.
What are you currently reading?
Ooh. A few things. It's in my bag. I can't bother to go and get it. So the I kind of made a promise to myself that on the whole, with very, 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 very few exceptions, I only read fiction now. Um, there was a time, not so long ago where there are certain things which become like the buzz at the moment. Like recently, it's been trauma, and everyone's into Gabor Mate and da 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 da. And you notice that if you keep kind of keeping up with all the up-to-date literature on trauma or breathwork or existential kink or all these other great things, you create a field around yourself of those things, and one can end up accidentally being so immersed in issues of trauma and issues of early wounding and issues of all this stuff that it becomes like a soup that you live inside that you just normalize. And I don't want that.
I get you.
I love my work and I love working with people in those areas when I'm working with them.
Mm.
But also, I don't want to just constantly live in that bubble. So, anyway, I love reading. I have a library. Reading is massive for me, and especially fiction, especially science fiction, certain fantasy genre. I tend to read things which were either set a very, very long time ago or very, very far in the future. I
Right.
don't very much that's set in the present day. So anyway, I've been reading The Gone Away World by Nick Harkaway, who's a wonderful writer. And it's a kind of it's not exactly steampunk. It's kind of peculiar dystopian, but very entertaining, funny, incredibly richly written novel. Breaking my rule about fiction, I saw this. I love Nick Hornby. I don't know if you know, he wrote High Fidelity. He wrote
Hmm.
About a Boy, which was a really good film.
Right.
He's just brought out this very sweet, very thin book comparing Dickens and Prince,
Okay.
a book about inspiration, basically.
Right on.
Um, and I just finished listening to the audiobook of John Castle's reading of Vanity Fair, which I just recommend to everybody. It's the rudest, most sarcastic, hilarious, incredible reading of Vanity Fair, which, if you don't know it, is often voted to be the best novel ever written by Thackeray in 1840 or something like that. And it's all about society and people who are sort of, like gentry and the poor people and the coach driver and the military and then all the different kind of echelons and the awful side of all of them. Um, but the narrator does it in such sarcasm and he's so rude about everybody in such a polite way. It just was laugh out loud funny just all the way through. So I've been spending a good 3 or 4 hours a day for the last week just listening to that and just roaring to myself with. Of course, we wouldn't dream for a moment that her motivations were anything but the purest when he's really saying she's just awful.
Right.
It's
But you
so funny.
maybe you can pick up on the sarcasm more than if you were just reading it or something. The
I think
performance.
so. I think the cadence, the certain things like things written in the 19th century, where when the cadence, it's like seeing great actors do Shakespeare. When you're reading it off the page, you can get some of it, but when you see someone who really does Shakespeare do it, you totally understand what they're talking about. They've got the rhythm, they've got the music of it, they've got the emphasis. Um, so I think there's a really great side to Audible, which is like when you get the right reader with the right book, it just comes alive fantastically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like it has to be read by the author.
Well,
For me personally.
memoirs, for me, I agree with you about memoirs. Memoirs have to be read by the author. Bono's one last week I listened to. Fantastic, beautifully read, beautifully expressed, very, very diverse, amazingly moving, touching.
You're going to feel it more when the person who's reading it actually lived those experiences.
Totally, totally. But with fiction, the right actor sometimes is, there are plenty of people like Stephen King, I don't think reads his books as well as some of the actors that do them.
Mm.
Um, there are plenty of people, who just don't have a good reading voice. Neil Gaiman is great. Anyway, we could go on all day
Yeah,
about
I've got a question which is completely unrelated to the conversation that I wanted to have. But what do you do with your hands when you're listening to a audiobook? I find this like I've got this addictive like needing to potter about or do something, and I can't just sit passively and listen to an audiobook. How do you find that?
Well, often I'm driving, so there's that. But you're right, there are some times when I have a game on my phone, which is like sort of quietens my OCD, which is you're sort of basically firing balls, a stream of balls at these
Oh
squares and
yeah,
bounce them off, and they kind of obliterate them. Different squares have different numbers, and how many times that square is hit is how many times to make it disappear, and you can get them into a bit like a
I get you.
Gordian breakout. And there's something about clearing each screen which sort of turns my brain off from all the usual sort of obsessive stuff. So yeah, sometimes I'll do that while I'm reading. Um, or sometimes I'm just sort of, like tidying up or, doing cooking,
Yeah,
doing what I'm doing.
it's very useful. It's a very useful thing to have audiobooks because it makes me more productive because I end up just like tidying up and
Yeah, since I discovered them, like my life, whether it be as a musician or as a teacher, has always involved a lot of travel, a lot of long
mm,
drives. And it totally has redefined a long drive now. Now it's like 3.5 hours to Devon. All right, what are we going to have? It's like, oh, it's like it becomes exciting instead of a drag. You've got three and a
yeah,
half undisturbed hours of immersing oneself in some beautiful world.
nice. Okay, well, I'd like to transition to
The actual
the topic. Yeah, I'm not really sure if it's an interview. I'd like to think it's more of a conversation because I'm completely open to your curiosity if that arises at all, and if you want to
sure.
ask me questions. So, how would you best describe the work you do in relation to the shadow?
Well, the shadow, and just to be clear, what we mean when we say the shadow is not our dark parts, but our hidden away in the shadows parts, which are beautiful parts of us. For many people, their creativity, their sexuality has been edited away and hidden in the shadows because someone told them it wasn't welcome or it was dirty or it was not good enough or whatever. So a lot of people have hidden away parts of themselves in the shadows which aren't dark. But yes, you could say our anger is dark or our tears are dark. Most people have lost their permission for their tears. They've been talked out of it as children or told they're making a fuss. Most people, anger was naughty where they grew up. That goes into the shadow and gets suppressed. Like I said, the sexuality, often feeling comfortable being naked, feeling comfortable speaking up and being a bit extrovert and excited about an idea. All these things have been squashed for a lot of people at different times. And so they think in order to be loved and in order to be included and not be emotional exile, they suppress and hide away those parts of themselves and present a kind of appropriate shop window, which is all the other bits. Um, and that creates not only a massive lack of potential in what a human life can be. If you imagine fundamental building blocks of who you are, like your tears, your rage, your creativity, your sexuality, these are not small things, and many other things besides. If you're living without those and you've lost contact with them and you don't feel comfortable in connection with other humans, enjoying and experiencing those things, your life is not even a half life. It's like a fifth life or a seventh life. It's like it's so urgent that we don't waste this brief life we have. I'm already in my 50s now, and like it went fucking quick, and I got like don't know how much longer I've got left. It goes quick. To waste it on this vanilla kind of appropriate sand down the edges, what would people think version, compared to the one where you're comfortable with your sexuality and your music and your rage and your tears and your extrovert moments and your excitement and your creativity. You can't compare the two. It's like a very, very fundamental, urgent thing for nearly everybody I know. Like I think pretty much everyone in the world is suffering under this ridiculously savage editing. That, like I say, it's not just edited a little bit off you; it's edited the fundamental building blocks. So that is so big to me, that realization. And on top of that, and this is kind of where I kind of focus quite sharply, I've noticed because of my own stories, that not only does it kill the actual essence of living a juicy, free, enjoyable life, it also, those things I've just described are the biggest creator of loneliness in the world. And loneliness is just, it's, in one sense, it's factored in. Whether if you believe in spiritual stuff, you've come from heaven or you've come from the great oneness, you were part of something bigger. you weren't alone, or even if you just think the mother's womb, when you first came into existence, you weren't alone. You were in the mothership, and you didn't have to do anything to be loved and fed. The food came into your tummy through a tube, and then suddenly you're born. So traumatic. You're suddenly this helpless, alone, sensitive. What's this skin? You've got emotions. You're like, you're being given conflicting information, and in your childhood, and often being shamed or being treated violently or coldly or love on and off and intermittent, and like, fuck, so confusing. Suddenly going from the oneness to going to this individuation of living in an ego and being a baby, a child, and everything that's put on you. It's huge. And so that loneliness of disconnection is factored in, but it's very, very hard, even for those of us that have been exposed to teachings which help us deal with it, whether it be meditation things or yoga things or just looking in a certain way, and forgiveness things and self-love things. Even those people who have been exposed to those things still, I know, go through an awful lot of loneliness, let alone the people that have never had that. And so, central to my work is, I want to, whether it be through my movies, through my songs, through my book, through my workshops, through everything I'm doing, through being a dad, is to have an impact, have a positive impact where I reduce as much of the loneliness in the world as I can.
That's a good mission to have.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, so the shadow doesn't necessarily mean the dark, nasty parts.
No, it comes from Jung, where it's what's hidden away in the shadows. It's what you want not people not to see and not to know about you, because you've learned it will get rejected or laughed at, or so you hide it away in the shadows. You hide your anger in the shadows, and then it leaks out because of all that suppression. They say, beware the anger of the quiet man. Most people's anger comes explosively because they've lost permission for it. So it's usually suppressed, but then it accumulates. And then somebody driving stupidly in front of you and not indicating, or something quite minor, can suddenly make it like, or the referee making a bad decision for the footy, or, it can suddenly explode out. Or the tears as well, like, people have lost their natural, beautiful emotional plumbing system of tears, which is an essential valve for all of us. People have lost permission for that, certainly publicly. So they cry at the end of the movie, or they cry at funny times where someone's being kind to somebody else in a Abbey National advert. They can't
I get
understand.
that.
That you're like, suddenly someone's kind to somebody,
Yeah, yeah.
and then you're just like gone.
Is it? Yeah, I would say that that's and maybe I'm really repressed, probably, but I find that very touching when things like that happen in the most unexpected places, of course, as well. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. When I'm telling a story to someone about something beautiful, I often can't get it out because I start crying, like, find it so moving, the story of maybe, just something to do with, it might be something even like religious, like something like Jesus did or something, like I'm trying to, yeah, I'm not Christian, but like, I find amazing beauty in a lot of the spiritual and religious stories.
Yeah, it seems like Jesus was quite a good guy.
Yeah, it was way cool. There's a great track called Jesus is Way Cool.
Right.
Very funny.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
So I did have a kind of like facetious question here, which was, why would anyone bother exploring the shadow? But you've answered it in what you recently said.
Yeah, because if you don't, you're not even living a half-life.
And it's a blocker of intimacy and
Creativity, everything that's good about life is reduced by how much of your essentialness you've got in the shadow.
Beautiful. So are there any dangers or drawbacks to shadow work?
Yeah, being too keen to be like, no pain, no gain. We're going to break through. We're going to do some deep shadow. Being too kind of like gung ho with it. When you're doing the shadow stuff, most of the stuff that got edited away into the shadows was when we were very young. So you're kind of beckoning back young parts to come and feel safe with you in the modern day, is essentially what you're doing. And no little child ever benefited or grew or progressed healthily from being dragged non-consensually into situations. Children thrive from gentleness, patience, and encouragement. And that's not how we've been accustomed to teach ourselves. It's not what we've been modeled. So the danger is slipping into the old modeling of how it was at school and trying to achieve something, trying to get to a finish line, having an agenda, being impatient, thinking that quicker is better. All those things that we've been modeled in school are useless, in fact, a hindrance. And it's actually the gentleness, the patience, and the encouragement, and having no agenda for it to change today. Like it might be tomorrow, it might be next week. It's not really up to us. We just keep showing up and just hope and be patient and be loving. And amazing things happen. We in my school, with the school for the insanely gifted, we call it the school of low-hanging fruit. It's like you wander through the garden, maybe a plum, juicy plum will drop into your hand. If today your soul has decided as a day for an illumination, there'll be no getting away from it. And if it's not the day for you to have an illumination, there's no amount of Ashtanga or nostril breathing that's going to make any difference. So you have to surrender to being a passenger, but still show up diligently.
Yeah, I resonate with that. Yeah, you can't really push for it. In your writing, you talk a lot about the masculine and the feminine energies, and it seems like you're talking to the more feminine receiving.
Yeah, I'd like us to stop for a while using masculine and feminine. I've used it, and because the Taoists, the yin yang people, call the yin feminine and the yang masculine. But I think these days, with trans and non-binary and gender being such a forefront of our, when you think of masculine and feminine from an electricity point of view, the masculine are plugs and feminine are sockets. It's you can understand how they arrived at that phrase, but there's so much kind of fraught. It's not, I think taking away the words masculine and feminine from the yin and the yang, I think it is the best thing to do these days, because I just think otherwise people get into the gender of it. It's nothing to do.
I get you.
So certainly the yang use of the will versus the yin being moved. Yeah, the yin has fallen much out of favor. The yang is how we operate our world. We've been taught to operate our world using our will, changing things to how we want them, making things how we want them, in penetrating the world with our will. And the other side, which we were just talking about, the yin being moved, being a passenger, allowing the flow to take us, not putting the river, being aligned with how things are already moving, has much fallen off, because you can't control the results as much, and the ego likes controlling the results. It doesn't want any risk, so it understandably likes the yang. And because we move from our ego most of the time, the yang seems like the most safe option, but the yin actually gets better results. And that's where most of the genius, like you're a musician, you hear a song, you don't make up a song. You twiddle around, or you might just hear a bass line and you just rock on that bass line for a little bit, and then you hear the top line melody that's going to go with that. You don't make it up. You don't get, I will play C, then I will play G. You don't do that. And that's why it always feels a little bit sheepish when someone says, oh, your song blew me away, it changed my life. You kind of like hearing it, but you also know you didn't really do it. You were a glorified secretary for the spirit of music, as we all are. And that's the best kept secret of all the musicians that are claiming all the royalties and suing other people for their great idea, is like, what did you exactly do there? Well, I was the secretary, but I'm the representative of this song. So, like there's a very funny paradox around all that, because we know that we receive songs, we don't make them up.
So whoever we're receiving it from is owed a massive royalty check.
Exactly, the spirit of music. That's why you should never pass a busker without putting something in the hat.
So this is a good, well, actually, I just read or I listened to 12 Notes by, I find it hard to access names sometimes, Quincy Jones. Yeah. It's the most recent book, and he talks about how he has this practice with writing music where he lets himself go to sleep with manuscript paper in front of him and a pen, and he would just fall asleep and then wake up, and like Dali used to do with getting his surreal ideas. It's talking to the more like receiving, the less pushing aspect of the creative process, because we do need technique. Like I can't write music like Quincy Jones, like technically write the music down.
Oh.
So that, I'm not sure if that would work for me. As
No, for you it's more like get your voice memo button nearby,
exactly,
hum
yeah,
something into the phone.
yeah, yeah. But it's like getting out of the pushing, and allowing yourself more to
Yeah.
receive.
Same with
And
prayer, you know, not just with making music, the same with connecting with the divine. There's a great line in the Screw Tape Letters, which is letters from an old devil to a young devil on how best to tempt his human by C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia books, crazy Christian mystic. And he goes, "My dear Wormwood, I notice your subject is doing an awful lot of praying. Don't worry about this. As long as he's talking to God and asking God for things and asking forgiveness and sending the energy from him to God, no problem, nothing to worry about. It's only when he shuts up for a moment and lets the energy come back in the other direction and pours God's love down into him, then we've got a problem. Call me." He goes, which we all know is true prayer. So according to that, it's like, you know, true prayer isn't about saying stuff to God. It's about emptying and being poured into, like the Holy Grail, like emptying and being poured into by the spirit of music. Emptying and being poured into is one of the great golden keys to access the genius of life.
So I've got quite a few questions, but also I want to respect your time, so I'm going to have to cherry pick them. But
good.
So basically, since writing Insanely Gifted, when was it written? When was it published?
A couple of years ago, maybe 3.
Okay. So I'm assuming that you've had a lot of workshop experience before that, that's culminated in the crystallization of the techniques and things that go in, have gone into the book. Okay. So the question I was going to ask is completely redundant. I was going to ask what techniques have proven to be most effective. What are your favorites? And yeah, is that even an appropriate question? Are they all?
Sure. Basically, being very silly, being playful, talking. Search for being playful. Laughter and joy and feeling social with each other and safe and chilling out is the best environment for doing this stuff. You do the least of it when you're triggered. And it's good to self-soothe when you're triggered and get conscious when you're triggered, but that's not the real time to do. You know, you can do some stuff there, but you really get much more done, I think, when you're not feeling triggered, when you're just feeling social and playful and easeful. So creating an environment which is like chilled and not like we're doing big deep stuff here, you know, like taking the drama away from it and just like playing some games together. Also removing all spiritual language, like not talking about chakras and crystals and dolphins and energy, and, you know, like minimize that kind of language. Talk about it in everyday speak. Just talk to people about what it's like being a person, you know, like I think a lot of the trappings of spiritual and new age stuff puts people off. So to just talk about it in everyday life terms that everyone can relate to, making it relatable instead of, oh, I'm not spiritual, this isn't for me. And the things I said before, like how you treat a small child, patience, encouragement, gentleness, and having no attachment to outcome, above all, having no attachment to outcome.
So a huge part of it is community and a sense of belonging to a group of people that might be doing the same or on the same path as you somehow.
Yeah, well, everyone is on the same path, whether they like it or not. Everybody's system is trying to free them and wake them up. But it might just be community just with one person you're talking to, like with you and me now. You know, there's a sense of community that we're on a similar tip. It doesn't have to always be a group, although it is very good. You know, like I have a particular thing called Game Changer, which I run as a group, and I run a couple of other groups as well, because the ongoing nature of a group does create a family that we're all sorely missing at the moment. And like one of Buddha's 4 noble truths was do it with your mates. And that's the one that often people forget. They read their self-help books alone, they go to the yoga class alone, they do so much of their growing or their healing alone.
The Sangha. We're missing the Sangha.
Massively. So I'm very much right now, like that's very front and center for me on the mission, is like creating as much Sangha as possible. So I do 2 groups a week, which are called Game Changer, people, ongoing families that do my games. 2 groups a week called The Lovely Gathering, which is just places for people to come when they don't want to be alone. Just creating as much of that Sangha as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I miss that. I I find myself like, I think I have an unhealthy relationship with social media. I think, well, obviously they're designed to encourage that, but I it's almost like the antithesis of connection for me. I think it's this voyeuristic kind of dopaminergic kind of behavior that just I feel depleted from, basically just scrolling, comparing.
Yeah.
It's really, but then also it's how the world is at the moment. And with that in mind, I'm thinking about, if you were to make one giant leap now, or what about me now? Because it was made at a time where social media wasn't around really. What do you think the narrative or the kind of things that people might say, like how do you think that might have changed?
Around what people would say on social media?
No, just in general, like, so what comes to mind now is the Maori guy who's talking about how everyone's watching TV and wanting to be like Puffy Combs.
Yeah.
but now we have so many influences, and I don't know, in watching it, because I just watched it in preparation for this conversation again, and I was struck by the sense of kind of nostalgia for a more simple kind of manipulation that was more identifiable.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it has become much more sophisticated than it, but it always was. I mean, like ever since the Second World War, when PR and marketing became very, very advanced, like it shot up through the Nazis, and like the propaganda went to a
Edward
whole nother
Bernays type
level
of thing.
in the 1940s. And Noam Chomsky talks beautifully about it. He calls it the engineering of consent. That in countries where you can't control people by force, you have to control their attitudes. So we are all brought up in a school or in a culture that says, if you become a millionaire, you made it. If you didn't, you didn't. And those are the values that you're set into. And you're also taught that there's nothing you can do to change the world, to help the world. And it is very strenuously beamed into the brains of the children that there's nothing they can do really to help the world. They can do a little protest, or they can click something and give £5 to the World Wildlife Fund, but there's basically these great corporate powers are much more, we're really, really brainwashed to think these corporate powers are invincible, which is strange because there's so many more of us than them, but everybody's so broken off into so many factions. It's such a shame because it's so sortable. If everyone would just unify, it would be there. They would they're only trading on your money and my money. You know what I mean? If everybody just decided to not buy into this particular help, like the fuel crisis at the moment, those companies are still making a fortune. The reason why the money's gone up 300% is because the suppliers of the petrol and the gas and the whatever have just, because of market whatever, have just got away, because of unregulated capitalism, have just been able to get away with it, But if everybody just said, no, sorry, we're not doing that. In fact, we're coming to take over your building. If you think you can just monopolize and rip everybody off, it could easily be done. You know what I mean? It's just that we're so subservient, we're so taught to obey and to think there's nothing we can do. And that has increased and increased and increased with the distraction of social media. And however, I am a big believer in the cavalry. I'm a really big believer in the archetypal story arc that is humanity. And it looked like in the Second World War, for example, and during the Second World War, it looked like all was lost. People forget how close it came to the Allies losing the Second World War. We all take for granted that we won, like we were always going to win. No, but for two decisions, but for two little things that happened. This fascinates me. So like I'm taking my time telling you about it, so you have to edit all that, I'm afraid.
Don't worry.
But for
Go for it.
two decisions we lost. There's two things that happened. One, somehow Churchill managed to persuade the Americans to come into the war. If that hadn't happened, see you later. Secondly, right at the beginning of the winter, when Hitler had taken over most of the world already, he could have just waited at the beginning of winter, not gone into Russia, just gone, you know what, we've taken over 3/4 of the planet. Let's just recuperate, restock, rest, and then after the winter, springtime, go into Russia. That would have been the end of it.
He
But he
was
was
too
just
hyped
like
up
so
on.
overexcited. He's just like, no, fuck it, let's just do it.
It was probably all that methamphetamine that he was taking.
Yeah. But for those two
That's
things,
crazy.
you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. I certainly wouldn't,
Mm.
with all my Jewish ancestry. So
Mm.
I find that amazing. And what happened? The cavalry, this story arc happened that it looked that all was lost, and then someone pulled something out the bag, and that's the story arc of the hero's journey of the embedded in our cells. That's the story arc. That you look at most movies, it's like this happens, that happens. It looks like it's going to be great. Then all seems to be lost, and then the cavalry comes at the end, and it's all saved. That's the story arc of movies. And I think, and I feel confident that whether the environment getting to a certain level and Los Angeles falling into the ocean and whatever's going to go on and the level of consciousness. But alongside that, social media also brings so many people together. Like I wouldn't be able to I've got tens of thousands of people following me in different places, turning up for my stuff. There's no way I would have that without social media. It's a double-edged sword. It's like water can drown you or it can refresh you. Social media can be a great galvanizing, unifying educational force, and is for many, many, many people, and gets rid of a lot of loneliness. A lot of people say it isolates you. It doesn't isolate me. It keeps me in touch with a lot of fucking people that I wouldn't be in touch with. I don't think it isolates me at all. So I'm confident that we forget when everyone's agonizing about the environment or agonizing about everything's being lost and it's all too late and we're all going to die, you forget that there are a million young scientists right now coming up with ways that fungus can eat all the plastic that's in the ocean. There's a million young scientists that are coming up with a way that suddenly they can double the amount of yield of solar energy when they just did it. There's a lot of fucking cool people, intelligent, diligent, hardworking people that are all working for positive, and breakthroughs happen. And I feel that we forget that there's every chance also that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there will be some massive positive breakthrough of some kind. Tipping points are building. You never know. I mean, there are things I would do to facilitate that. I would love to disconnect capitalism from medicine. I think that would be the best thing for this planet right now. While it's for profit, you make a lot more money treating symptoms than you do curing things. So while it is a profit-driven enterprise medicine, there's much less money going into cures than there is into managing symptoms. And that's a shame. If capitalism was disconnected from medicine and it was all about, yes, managing symptoms, but a lot more was going into cures because no one cares about the profit loss, there would be a lot more things being cured. And in many other sectors of the world, a lot of more progress would be made if it wasn't just unregulated capitalism. The worship of quick money could be what would kill us if we're going to all be extinct. It's not the worship of money. You could worship money and do it sensibly. The worship of quick money with no regard for the consequences, the age of the golden calf, is what could kill us. Just the ego of a handful of white men needing to have a number on their bank account that is bigger than the number on somebody else's, billions and billions of money just not circulating and being used to feed the old people and educate the young people and look after everyone. That's where that money should be going. But for some reason, a handful of small people are playing some roulette game and have kind of taken over the resources of the planet for their, sociopathic ego issues.
Maybe they should do some shadow work.
Well, I actually think they should do some shadow work, but I think even more than that, they should have it taken out of their hands. I think basically it should be, look, I'm sorry, mate, you've got 180 billion, but we're taking 179 of those now, and we'll pay your therapy, and we'll name a dog park after you that says, yes, you get a plaque that says, I beat capitalism. But you don't actually get to freeze up 179 billion of the world's resources, which is well needed elsewhere, just so that you can feel like a big man. Sorry. And you don't get to spend it on your little dream that you've always wanted to fly around the moon. We'll do that later when we've got clean water in Africa, for everyone to drink. Let's do that first, shall we? And they need a parental figure to, it's obvious, but morally, I don't know how we allow that. And it should just be taken away from them and pay for the very expensive therapists for them.
So yeah, Jung talks about the personal psychological shadow, and then talks about the shadow in society as well. And it's potentially what we're talking about now, is because society is built upon guidelines that prohibit certain activities and behaviors and thoughts and things like that. And maybe if these people were more accepting of certain parts of themselves, they wouldn't be so driven to, for instance, have this massive ego trip.
Yeah. It's a long journey, though. You know what I mean? Like, we are so entrenched.
Yes.
It's a lot, like, on the one hand, you tell me you're doing your Ashtanga yoga, and I know obviously there's a million more yoga centers there are now than there were 10 years ago. And it all seems to be heading in the right direction, but also you forget how niche we are. You forget actually that the amount of people even reading The Power of Now, or even the big self-help books or whatever, like, it's a tiny sliver of actually the people that are at large. We're still incredibly niche, and you forget, just because you're into it and I'm into it, a lot of the people we are into it, and that's what we get in our Facebook feed. It looks a lot more prominent than it really is. There's a long way to go. It's a fun way to go.
It kind of leads me to next question. Something I've been thinking about. So I had this songwriting collective, and we were reading loads of spiritual books. It was kind of like a very mind-opening experience time for me. And then I kind of had this change of heart where I didn't want to be a hippie. I want to be able to interact and engage with everyone. Well, not everyone, but just a broad range of human beings without being pigeonholed as a hippie necessarily. And I suppose the question is, I find it overwhelming being so many different people, basically, and having so many different sides to me, because I'm a very normal, straight-laced kind of person. I'm also like free thinker and part of the niche that you were talking about. How do you reconcile the concept of being fully yourself with when the societal and social context is constantly changing? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that the premise of that question kind of separates you from that cultural wave of society, everything changing. And I don't look at it like that there's me and then there's everything else. Like, the part that asks that question is pure ego. And I don't mean pure ego like a naughty ego, prideful, like, I'm not dissing the ego here, but it's a very individuated question. There's me and there's everything else. How am I going to fit into this? When really you are everything else. I think with Krishnamurti, Muktananda, or whoever, they said, what do you do with difficult others? And he said, there are no others. For example, people ask the question, people believe that everything's perfect, and everybody, even the people who are suffering, are doing it for their correct spiritual curriculum at the time. So therefore, you shouldn't give money to the hobo. You shouldn't give money to the homeless person, because you're interfering with their spiritual path. But what people forget is that I'm part of nature. I'm part of that homeless person's life, or part of this whole world. And if it's perfect that they should be a homeless person, it's also perfect that I, someone who cares deeply and wants to give them some money have walked past. So my wish to ease that bit of suffering that day, if I possibly can, is included in the perfection. It's not just me and everything else. My urge to give, my urge to heal, my urge to reduce the loneliness in the world is part of all this. So to answer your question, if you feel, because of the way culture is going, that you passionately want to make songs that might make people consider other things that are healthy, healing, interesting, you're part of it. Put all of your passion and your goodness and your energy into the things where you intersect with culture and the ways that you want to affect it and the ways that you want to dance with it. That's included. And the way it affects you and how you want to look after yourself in that, which might mean going to do another Vipassana retreat or going and staying in a tent in Scotland for a while and taking breaks, or it might be going deeper in and entering the fray as a warrior. You know, you are you. You know what turns you on and what energizes you. So meet it as part of it and treating yourself as a welcome part, that anything that you feel passionately about is just as relevant as anything that culture is telling you. Does that go anywhere close to your question?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It was a welcome ego check, because I did, when you said that that's ego talking, I didn't take it as in like, oh, you've got a big ego kind of thing. I just took it as like, that's the individuation, rather than the acknowledgement that I think it was Alan Watts said that like the earth is peopling, you know, there would be no people without the context, that, you know, there's no subject without the context. So
Lovely.
yeah, thank you.
Lovely.
What excites you? Like, do you have any big dreams or aspirations, or what's exciting you at the moment?
What excites me? Very mundane things. It's funny, like, I don't know if that excites me. I mean, just, you know, interactions with people. I'm kind of more interested in what brings me peace than what excites me. Even though, you know, there are some things that are exciting. I'm enjoying the I'm writing a couple of things at the moment that feel juicy, and I'm spending more time interacting with more humans, you know, because I notice that a lot of the time I can suddenly just only see people I'm working with or my kids, and you know, friendship is like super important. Little things excite me. The book I'm reading, the just the little things of today. I don't have any like huge big excitements going on, but above all, the gratitude that there's a dry place to sleep, there's petrol in the car, there's food in the fridge, the kids are healthy. That's what really, really is central to my life. Like, I've had times in my life where I've been rolling in it, and I've had times in my life when I've been on the breadline. And my concept of luxury is the basics being covered. You know, the basics, the dry place to sleep, the food in the fridge, the petrol in the car, your kids being healthy, you know, and the gratitude that that's all ticking along at the moment, and I'm not in this big like fucking hell panic stations. And that actually my youngest, you know, my kids are quite old now, so it's like there isn't that panic of how am I going to support the kids till they're adults. You know, that was in my earlier life. It's like, how's this going to carry on? Because you know what it's like, you're the same as me, you're an artist, you make your money off the whatever idea popped into your head. It's not like you've got a 9 to 5 job, which is, you're not going to get promotion in 2 years and there's a trajectory where you just basically know the basics. I could never give away 40 to 60 hours of my waking life a week for that security. I think it's a totally false economy. I think the price is far too high. Give away all your daylight hours and have 2 weeks off a year in order to feel secure that you've got a house. Like, it's a ridiculous price. So we took the risk let's have all our time to ourselves and just see if we can eke out a living with our creativity and with our entrepreneurship. It's definitely worth it, but it really comes with sometimes, as I'm sure you have. I don't know if you've got kids, but like, I got three. There are times where you're just like, how is this going to carry on? I have no idea how I'm going to live out this next year or two, let alone how I'm going to carry this on for the next 18 years till my kids are all grown. Like, how the fuck is this going to carry on? And so while I'm at a moment right now where it's all right, it's carrying on. It's not, there's not some great big trauma worry about basic survival going on. I'm just like, wow, life is amazing. Life is amazing when the survival needs are met.
Yeah, that's relief and inspiring to hear. Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely relate to that, worrying about where the money's going to come from.
Yeah, it's like, how does this kind of carry on?
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it does. And
Well,
mad things
let's
happen.
hope.
Mad things happen, like extraordinary things. Like one of the great sort of mad things that happened in my life was when one of our backing vocalists from Faithless, I mean, Faithless happening was a miracle, but also one of our backing vocalists was Dido. And she sold like 30 million records or whatever, twice, I think she sold that amount. And, that kept everybody for about 3 years. That paid for everybody's in our musical community. If you wrote one song on one of her albums, which I did, that like gave everyone a 3-year breather. Just
Fantastic.
30 million copies went out. It's like, okay, for a few years, we can pay them, we can all chill. That was such a gift from God, how that happened. So you get these little moments where you suddenly get a breather from the worry.
Yeah, that's inspiring. So are
Happens
you
like cavalry I was talking about before. It can happen at any moment. This sudden unexpected breakthrough. That's what people don't factor in with all their worrying. Miracles also happen.
You're
The
worrying
cavalry
about
suddenly
the bad things, but you could also worry about all the good things that could
if you're
happen.
going to fantasize and project into the future, you might as well equal it with positive ones as well. At least do half.
I think my intellectualization of worrying is that I'm kind of inoculating myself for the bad things that might happen by living it before it's happened, almost. I'm not sure if that's the healthiest
I'm
way of
not
doing
sure it is.
it.
Mark Twain said, I've lived through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. You give your spleen and your body chemistry the experience as if the bad thing happened. And I'm not sure that's immunizing you, because if it immunized you, then you wouldn't worry about it anymore after you'd given yourself the thing once. But the thing is, you do it 5, 10 times. And until it's resolved, you'll keep doing it. So you give yourself 10 times the experience instead of just the one that might happen. So I think it's a bit of a false economy.
Okay, I will take that on board. I need to just chill the fuck out, maybe.
No, you don't have any choice what your mind is going to do. It's like saying you can control the weather or you can control the choppiness of the sea. All you can do is go, oh, a choppy day. Oh, that's all right, mate. That's what you can do. Hello, old friend.
I like that. Where you're like, you just you have a thought and then you go, oh, like that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? I really
That's my
enjoyed that.
little joke I do with people, with groups. It's like, yeah, whatever goes wrong, you just rub your heart. And then I pretend that there's this ancient, very advanced Tibetan mantra. And I say, you do this with me, and everyone leans in. I say, try and make the sound. And actually, the sound is, oh. But if you do that a lot, you can do it on someone else when they're freaking out. Oh. It just brings you back to kindness, it brings you back to, it's all right. It's all right, mate.
I have a sense that it has to be calibrated, though, otherwise you might get punched in the face. But
it depends who you do it on. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Something else. Yeah. Something else that I've taken with me since like going over your work again is whenever I judge someone, I say just like me, or
like me.
It's really annoying because
I know.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Hunt by the angels all the time.
Yeah.
Ramdas says, you walk along, you fall over, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, you look sheepishly at God, you carry on. You fall over, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, you look sheepishly at God, you carry on, and that rinse and repeat.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. So we've got like 5 minutes left. Just want to ask you a couple of closing questions. Like on that topic, what was it like meeting Ram Dass?
It was a mixture of wonderful, and I wasn't, I was, there was a part of me that, so wanted his approval that I wasn't fully my absolute most natural self around him. Although a lot of the time I was, but a lot of the time I wasn't. I've just been reading this today. This is his lovely Being Ramdas book. Actually, I've had lovely times with him, lots of times, both on the three movies that he was in of mine, the two One Giant Leap ones and Becoming Nobody, also hanging out with him on various retreats. But actually, I think, the most benefit or the most gold I've got from Ramdas hasn't been from the times I was actually in his presence. It was more times of, like listening to his podcast, reading his books, being exposed to his wisdom. But at the same time, there was a side of me that, like, he was like my spiritual father. And so like, I'm glad I showed up for making that film, Becoming Nobody. And I showed up for just being honest with him that I really needed him to tell me that I was a good son. I'm glad I showed up for that. I wasn't proud. I was upfront about what I needed, and he lovingly gave it to me.
That was a beautiful moment in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the movie begins with that request and ends with it being given. The movie begins with him saying, "What are you doing here?" And I saying, "I've come here to say thank you and to get the keys to the executive spiritual washroom." And and I think, then halfway through the film, I say, I think I was like trying to be like, I said, I asked you right when I first met you. I've come all the way to be told I'm a good son. And then right at the end, he kind of finally breaks. He finally gives in. But that's just part of subplot of the movie that not everybody appreciates. Like, a lot of people think, who is that fucking wanker? He's trying to make a film about an egoless being. He can't help his own great big ego feet tromping all over the movie. There are a lot of people on the IMDb website. If you read it, it's like hilarious. It's like such brutal reviews of my part in that film. But like, I was there for me. I wasn't only there for humanity. I was there for Ramdas to get his stuff out to the world, like, in a way that was going to be eternal. I was there for everyone that was going to see the film, but I was also there for me, and I'm all right with that.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. And are you making any music at the moment?
Yeah, of course. I haven't finished this record, but like, I noticed that, I don't know if you know very much from my music, but like, one of the more recent albums, this album called Internal Music for Dissolving, which is a very beautiful album, but it's very much sort of yearning, longing. I started it after I got divorced to like find those parts of myself that couldn't quite find the feeling of. For men, it's quite hard to find the tears and find the yearning. But then I suddenly realized I've been like glorifying the yearning and the longing artist archetype so much that, just like the trauma books, keep creating a field of trauma, I've been creating a field of longing, just like living in the longing as if that was like some glory in it. So more recently, I got into the idea, I'm done with all this fucking yearning and longing. I want to make music about having, and be in that field of energy. So I got in touch with this really great producer called Matt Coldrick, who makes a lot of music, a lot of great meditation music. And we holed up in an apartment in Corfu and started this other record called All Heart, and sounding really killer. It's like really like joyful, moving. Like, I'll send you a link to one of the tracks.
Please do.
So, well, I'm sure we'll finish it at some point. It's got like this mad shepherd wailing over the top, but it's very like expansive and kind of like alive.
Okay. So like the opposite of the
Yeah, it's
sorrowful
like
kind of.
having it, not wanting it.
Great. yeah, Jamie Catto, thank you so much for your time.
Brilliant.
And yeah, I'll see you at one of your workshops or
Always
one of the
welcome.
calls. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, bro.
See you later.
Thanks for having me.